project, I have focused on families and mental illness. Mental illness has been a big interest of mine for many years, so I really wanted to take this opportunity to learn more about how mental illness affects entire family units instead of just focusing on how mental illness affects an. When you start to read and learn about the statistics surrounding mental illness, it's pretty overwhelming. Research shows that 1 in 4 adults, that's over 61 million Americans, will experience mental illness within any given year. And of that huge number of people who suffer from mental illness, roughly 60% of adults and about 50% of youth with mental illness have received no treatment for their illness in the previous year. It's important to remember that mental illness can affect anybody. It's something that it doesn't discriminate. Likewise, just like mental illness can affect any kind of individual, it affects families of all type. Families with a family member with mental illness represents a wide group of people in terms of social class and ethnicity, religious affiliation, and even their quality of family relationships. Each family member's reaction to the mental illness depends on their role in their family, their experiences, their needs, and their concerns, and it's also influenced by a number of social, psychological, and biological factors. One of the main ways that researchers view families and mental illness is the family-oriented view. This states that the causes, courses, and outcomes of mental illness are influenced by a lot of different factors, including biological predispositions to illness, genetic and psychological vulnerability, and family stress, which can include things like parenting quality, family conflict, and relationship quality. So it's really important that we learn more about mental illness and how it affects families, because the majority of time it's a family member that will be the caregiver of the person with mental illness. Research shows that nearly 75% of patients who are released from some kind of psychiatric inpatient treatment, whether it's a mental health facility or hospital, when they're released, they return home to live with their families. So what this means is that nearly 3/4 of patients who are released from receiving some kind of treatment for their illness, they're going to be taken care of by a parent or a grandparent, an aunt, uncle or sibling. Somebody in their family is going to be their main caregiver. That leads to a brief discussion about caregiver burden or family burden. This is the overall level of distress that results from the family member's mental illness. And there are two main types of burdens. There's objective burdens and subjective burdens. Objective burdens refer to the family's daily hassles of caring for a mentally ill relative. It includes things like having to deal with the actual symptoms. A lot of times they're negative symptoms that occur. Mood swings, disruptive behavior, poor daily living habits. It also includes the more tangible things like financial difficulties that the family experiences. It can also include employment problems, strained family relationships, and then the actual challenges that the family member faces in terms of their own physical and mental health. Subjective burden, on the other hand, is the personal suffering that is experienced by a family member in terms of their situation. It includes things like their feelings of grief and loss. A lot of times they mourn the family member that they once knew that is now different because of their mental illness. There's also a pretty common subjective burden called chronic sorrow, and that's just the feelings of grief and loss that the individual experiences off and on throughout their lifespan. One of the biggest subjective burdens is stigma, and I will talk more about stigma here in just a few minutes. Throughout the semester, while I interviewed the family that I talked with mental illness, and then learned about it, one of the most helpful things for me was to keep referring to the Hills ABCX model that we talked a lot about this year. This is just a great way to look at families with mental illness. In this model, A, the stressor event interacts with B, the resources and the family's strengths, and C, the perception of the stressor. And all of that interacts together to produce X, which is the stress or the crisis. Again, I just wanted to point it out for you to keep in mind, like for future professional practice. But this is a great way to help frame the situation both for yourself and for the families that you're working with. So throughout the semester, when learning more about families dealing with a family member with mental illness, there were two main key experiences that I kept coming across in the research. And the first one was stigma. Stigma is defined as an attempt to label something or mark it as shameful, disgraceful, or disapprove of it in some way. Stigma in terms of mental illness leads to things like a lack of insurance coverage for services, fear and mistrust and violence against people with mental illness and their families. A lot of times, unfortunately, family and friends will turn their backs on the person with mental illness, and the stigma really can lead to serious issues in terms of prejudice and discrimination. In terms of families, the whole family can become entrenched in stigma quite easily. For many years, and still a large number of people blame parents for causing the mental illness in their children through faulty parenting, so that leads to stigma on part of the parents. And then the parents will oftentimes encourage their siblings not to tell anybody and kind of keep it a secret. So that's kind of briefly how stigma can become furthered, and the cycle kind of continues in terms of mental illness. There are some things that we can do to help families overcome and fight the stigma related to mental illness. First, it's always important to use respectful language with these families. Just watch how you phrase things. A lot of times we might kind of just offhandedly say something about, he's crazy or she's crazy, but just be sure to watch what you say and keep it respectful. Encourage these families to get treatment and help them deal with any feelings of shame or self-doubt that they may have. Supporting families to participate again in treatment and the support groups are really important, because this helps families realize that they're not alone, which right there can help reduce stigma. It's also important that we as professionals and in our personal lives, we speak out against the stigma and help break down media stereotypes of mental illness, and also help the family remember that they have choices and that they're kind of in control of their own destiny, as that helps them feel more in control of their own situation. Second key experience that I came across quite frequently in research was parental or caregiver well-being. Like I said, it's been widely believed that parents cause mental illness in their kids by being, quote, bad parents. So this leads to parents and caregivers facing a lot of increased challenges. A lot of times these parents report having a lot more emotional strain. They have to devote a lot more time to their parenting duties. They also are really confused a lot of times about the symptoms of mental illness and how to help best meet their child's needs. They may even use a lot of defensive mechanisms like distancing, denial, and blaming, and that is a way that they can protect themselves from really becoming invested in the relationship with their child, because a lot of times parents are fearful of this relationship. Mothers may be very vulnerable to kind of, I guess, caregiver burnout in terms of a child with mental illness. A lot of times mothers will feel extremely guilty because they do feel responsible for causing the problems. You might hear moms say a lot of times, what did I do wrong? Why did this happen to my child? What could I have done differently? A lot of times they'll view themselves as a failure, and they'll have very low self-esteem. These mothers also may experience more somatic and depressive symptoms and have a lot more issues with anxiety disorders than parents in the general population. One interesting thing that I read in the research was that a parent's obligation to a child with mental illness is the most enduring and powerful of all family obligations. So when you're working with a family dealing with mental illness, and if it's a parent and a child, just keep that in mind, that even though it might be very difficult and the parent might be having a lot of issues, that relationship oftentimes is the most powerful relationship that parent will experience in their life. So that might help us to form our treatment plan and help enforce that. There are a lot of resources available for parents and families dealing with mental illness. Our textbook talks about several. There's therapy, which family-based treatment is often really imperative as it involves all the family members. There's also psychoeducation, which includes that education component, but also it helps family members learn coping skills and helps them increase their social support. There are internet-based resources, which I think a lot of times as professionals in the field, we might kind of have our doubts about these resources, but a lot of times people go online to help find local agencies and find out about symptoms to see if what's going on with their family member. It's important for us to remember also that a lot of times internet-based resources might be the only source of support that some people may be able to access because it's free. So keep that in mind. The last type of resource talked about in our textbook was social policy, which leads me into the discussion of the organization that I focused on for the second part of the project, and that's NAMI. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and there is a local affiliate in Lexington, Kentucky, which is very close. NAMI is the largest grassroots mental health organization in the nation. Their goal is to promote recovery. All of their programs and services are offered completely free of charge. You don't have to have insurance, you don't have to pay co-pays, there's absolutely no financial obligation. My local NAMI affiliate offers a lot of different services. They have support groups for the consumers and family members. They have a survivor of suicide support group. They offer a NAMI introduction program weekly to learn more about NAMI and the services they offer. And they also have a participation station, which the participation station is actually for the individual that is diagnosed with mental illness. They can go into the participation station and just kind of have time of fellowship. They can also take different classes about computer skills and recovery and things like that. So the participation station also offers a warm line, which is a non-emergency helpline for the person with mental illness that they can call just when they feel like they need to talk to someone. There are two major NAMI programs that are offered. The first is NAMI Basics. It's actually a new program to the Lexington area. This class is 6 weeks long. It meets for 2.5 hours every week. And this program is specifically for parents or caregivers of children and teenagers who have been diagnosed with mental illness. This program teaches the parents and caregivers coping skills, management skills, communication and listening, problem solving, and a lot more. And they really focus on how to best help the child or teenager succeed in the mental health field, the legal field, and in the school system. Research about NAMI Basics shows that people who complete the program show increases in both self-care and empowerment, and they also have decreased aggressive communication within the family. The second major NAMI program is called Family to Family. This program was created back in the 1990s, and its focus is, it was created to help focus on the unmet needs of families dealing with mental illness. It's based on three major theories, the theories of adaptation, stress, and coping. The program is 12 weeks long. Again, it's free of cost. And the Family to Family program is for a wider range of people. It's for friends, partners, and family members, basically anybody with a relationship with an individual diagnosed with mental illness. This program, again, is 12 weeks long. It covers a lot of different topics, talks about different diagnoses and symptoms, focuses a lot on research on the brain, medications and treatment, how to handle crisis and relapse, communication and problem solving, caregiver, how they can focus on their own self-care, advocacy, and empathy. And throughout this program, I think one of the best things is that the family member or friend or whoever it is taking the class, throughout the 12 weeks, they get to collect all these notes and handouts, and at the end of the program, they get to take home a really big binder. It's almost 300 pages of resources that they get to take home and keep. So I just thought that that was great because it will help them refer back to the program in the future. Research shows that Family to Family leads to increases in empowerment, problem-focused coping, and knowledge about mental illness. Participants also have higher levels of acceptance. They also have better family problem-solving skills and coping skills. And then the program has also been shown to lead to decreases in anxiety and worry and displeasure in terms of the mentally ill relative. So throughout the semester, like I said, I focused on families and mental illness. I really feel like I've learned a lot, and I think that it's really important that we keep in mind that we might run across a lot of different families that are dealing with mental illness. I found this quote by Fran Berger. She says, "It really helps friends and families gain a better understanding of their loved ones' problems. It gives them a time to really sit down and talk about the stigma that comes along with mental illness and the frustrations people have and the lack of services. So I think that's just really important for us to keep in mind. A lot of times these families might try and stay hidden because they might be scared or ashamed or really embarrassed by what's going on. So I think it's important that we just make these families feel comfortable, let them know that they're not alone, and get them connected with helpful resources as soon as possible.